So we are live. Yeah, good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, depending where you are. We are here at Connect Africa. On Saturday, our topic for today is regarding Eritrea's 32nd Independence Day. So we have here our usual analyst on the Horn, and particularly on Eritrea, Dr. Biniam Misgun. And we have one more guest, Ato Girmays Haile. So I am really, really happy to have you both here. Belated happy Independence Day. Thank you for coming. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Mahlet, once again. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
All right, then. Okay. So, 32nd Independence Day of Eritrea. Just let me say this. Personally, I find this, especially as a Pan-Africanist and also from Ethiopia, I find it very, I never thought it in this way, very symbolic for Eritrea, that having an Independence Day on the 24th of May, which is just the eve of the African Liberation Day. And speaking of today, I mean, the African Liberation Day was, it was 60 years ago, the Organization of African Unity was established, but maybe the Europeans have gone from the continent physically, but that colonization after neo-colonization still exists in the continent, and it's very much a hot topic in the continent. So having Eritrea, for which we all know Eritrea as that country who has really the gut to say no for anything that, if it doesn't believe in it in the face of the so-called international organization, to the Western countries and particularly to the US, while other African countries don't have somehow that capacity to say it. So this is really a symbolic one, but also it's not just that for free the country has got that freedom. It's more than 2 decades or almost 3 decades years of resilience because of the challenges it has, the sanctions that has been put up on the country by the Western countries and the so-called international organizations. Let me start by asking the first question to our guest, Ato Girmays Haile. What factors do you think have contributed to the remarkable resilience of the Eritrean people over the past 3 decades, and how has it shaped, the collective strengths of Eritreans? Before you answer that, I did not do the introduction. Please introduce yourself, and you can go ahead and answer the question.
Thank you very much, Mahlet. Well, by way of introduction, I think you have done enough. It's the snippets that speak more than the details. But basically, I'm a veteran of the Eritrean independence struggle. And I also worked with the Eritrean government right after independence. And then from there, I moved on to work for the United Nations for about 23 years. And I took an early retirement, and I'm now doing my research and studies around Pan-Africanism, and as well as the Horn of Africa region in particular, and the Southern Africa region additionally. And this has been my preoccupation, especially in the last 4 years, trying to understand what we understand of ourselves as Eritreans, and also what we understand of ourselves vis-a-vis the African struggle, and especially the Horn of Africa in particular. Your question is a very interesting question, probably one question that has, to my knowledge, never been asked until today. And what is the secret? The Eritrean struggle from its initial days, which is about 80 years now, 70, 80 years, with the colonial occupation of Italy, and the spontaneous indigenous movements for rights and independence, and also the power factors that were at that time around that area in terms of allegiances. Whenever there is an attempt to make allegiances with various forces from within the southern border of Eritrea, then there are also other interests that come in the way and kind of deprived the Eritreans of a cohesive, coordinated, and supported movement to wage for independence. So early on, Eritrean leadership understood that if there is going to be any kind of formal or informal struggle for independence, the core issue is that we have to depend on ourselves. Nobody will deliver this for us except ourselves. So this is the genesis of the Eritrean journey towards independence. And in that independence also, what mattered in terms of focus was who is our real enemy? Who are we fighting against, or who are we fighting to get this independence from? That was a critical question, and which, to my knowledge, until this day, especially Ethiopians have not really understood that question. They talk about separation, secession, Tegenet and so on, but that's not what it was. For Eritreans, this was a right to self-determination because it was a colony of Italy, and so therefore other colonies of other colonial powers around Africa were also gaining their independence. And there was also this treaty that was signed between Emperor Menelik and the Italians about the existence and formal recognition of Eritrea as a non-Ethiopian territory. And it was towards the end when the Americans and the British started to meddle in this, as they were the victors of the Second World War, in terms of determining the fate of the various colonies that were there in the continent, tossed away and tossed about the Eritrean issue based on their interest. And that's where it had begun. So for the Eritreans and the Eritrean movement, we were not fighting anybody but the US policy that made our day difficult. Yes, on ground, it was the Ethiopian forces that were in Eritrea fighting the war, but we had always considered this as a proxy agent, but not necessarily as a prime enemy. So therefore, Eritreans believed from early on that there is no issue that will take us to war at any one point in time with Ethiopia, but rather that whoever is working on behalf of the United States that has basically messed up the entire future of Eritrea. And so therefore, that's where the focus stood. So with that focus, it was very important for the leadership to start to understand what mechanisms to put in place. So I think what came out of all this is we will do this on our own. There is nobody to help us. There is nobody to win this battle and war and of independence for us, but ourselves. So the emphasis on cohesion has been engendered in this whole movement from a very, very long time. So the secret, I think, and what has brought the Eritreans not only to that point of independence, but what seems to be propelling them going forward up to this point, is the cohesiveness of Eritreans, cohesiveness between leadership and the population, cohesiveness of the various ethnic groups amongst themselves, cohesion of the genders that were very important, and cohesion and peaceful coexistence of the religious establishments, and also that what I always call that cohesion between the various generations of Eritreans, one taking the baton after the other, and so therefore building on what they have received to go forward. So this is what I think has been at the core of the Eritrean struggle, and now the Eritrean mentality as well.
Thank you very much, Ato Girmays. Although you refuse to introduce yourself, okay, I take it that as a humble approach. Okay, but yeah, really, what for me the highlight is that the cohesiveness between the people and the government. Which still, there are different religions in the country, different ethnic groups, but to have that as a unified nation, that is something by itself that needs an explanation. That's by itself a topic to discuss, because many African countries having that different, even in one religion where there is, most of the people have the same religion, but different ethnic groups failed really to unify the people. Very interesting, really. I will bring our Dr. Biniam now, really to answer the same question. In your view, really, what is the secret for Eritrea for such resilience, for that has long lasted for more than 3 decades, and it seems even on a very strong position to go for more, a very determined people and government. What is the secret behind this, Dr. Binia?
Thank you, Mahlet. First, I would have to say this. I'm really pleased to have come to this forum with Giramay Haile. He's a legend. He's one of well articulate, well spoken, and well informed freedom fighters. One of the freedom fighters. And he has been a Pan-Africanist through and through. He even his work in the UN has been one of trying to promote African interests in those platforms. And I'm really glad to have him here and be with him in this forum. Yes, to answer your question, and I think there isn't one thing you would call a secret, but it is a process. Yeah, it took 80 years for this to be formed. Yeah, with a lot of mistakes that have been made. Now you spoke about the religious divisions, and of course Eritrea had to go through that period under the British military administration. That trying to divide Muslim, and Christians. They have tried ethnic divisions of different sorts, to implement their objectives of domination, perpetuating that domination that they had already been used to. And Eritreans had to go through that experience of, having to fight one another, and eventually having to come to conclusion that this is not a way to actually address our problem. So at the beginning of the struggle in the 1940s, already fighting against the British colonial administration, and then going into the 50s within the actual form of federation that the UN had established, a federation with Ethiopia. Even within that, parliamentary engagement and all that were somehow tainted with this kind of divisive element. But then the actual struggle from the 1960s onwards, where we should learn lesson from that and move on into building a state. So a state building, a nation building, it started within that struggle. So that this struggle had helped Eritreans accumulate what we see today as a force. Yeah. A cohesive society, progressive leaders that were sharpened within this process, and you have an army that is being also shaped and formed within this struggle. That this is very crucial. The second element I always point out is the ways in which individuals are mobilized. Yeah. As part of the struggle, it also contributed to the Eritrean we see today, a resilient, well-organized, committed citizens. It did not come up all of a sudden. It was work. It had to be built over a long period of time. So that historical process. And the third element is that we call it Girdli. Girdli, what it did was it appropriated what is relevant of the, from the society, from the culture, solidarity, support structures, and the kind of social capital that already existed. It used that and mobilized it effectively, and what had to be discarded also had to be discarded. So whenever we say our culture, all elements are not that great, all elements are not that good, but then there are strains in it. So the strains, you appropriate them, you build on them, and those you consider to be irrelevant also must be checked out. So building that solidarity was very important. Using that as a social capital to build the nation was very important. And that's why now you see many Eritreans, wherever they are, they just jump in. We need to contribute. We need to do this. And all these festivals you see, people contribute out of their pockets. Many think that the embassy is contributing to it. No, it is actually individuals. They chip in. Let's do it. And then coordinated themselves, and that's how they have this kind of events wherever you go. Maybe, some facilitation might happen from the embassies, but generally it is the individuals that are taking those initiatives. And this is, what I call the essence of being a citizen. You take part in it. And it's not just in this, but it's also in all sorts of other projects as well. The people are contributing, willing to contribute, and ultimately also paying the necessary sacrifice in order to build these nations. I wouldn't say everybody is into it, but then the majority had bought into this idea, and it was cultivated over a longer period of time. And that's why Girmay pointed out to you, it is an intergenerational one. So you would see the generations in the 1940s, and then the generation in the 1950s, the 60s, the 70s, so it goes on. Now you have the generations in the 90s. My generation probably were in between, but then the subsequent generation has also picked it up with Warsai, and then now the younger generations. So it is intergenerational. Both the struggle, the hardship has taught us so much. But also it had to be worked on as well. The leaders were not created in overnight. They were created through a long process of having to cultivate them and learning from experience. And many of the leaders that I know in Eritrea, they still are in that period of the 70s and the 80s, and working within that modality. And I know many African leaders who were that progressive are no longer, embracing what they had once when they were young. They want to be in a lavish villa. They are now using, expensive cars and whatever. So they have become role models, and everybody had followed through. And I think we are here today, and the struggle hasn't ended. There's so much to achieve. There's so much that we're missing, and we still need to work on. But the bigger lesson is cumulative one, I would say. Back to you, Mahlet.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Biniam, and really thank you also, Ato Girmays, for really, giving us the background where the resilience comes from. And indeed, it's really a learning for us, for Ethiopian particularly, and also for Africans. There is a lot to learn. Now, moving to the second question, now reflecting on that resilience of the Eritrean people and the government as well, what do you think is that the key lessons picked by the Eritreans or by the Eritrean government, and then and how these lessons have been rewarding to the Eritrean people in various aspects, of course. Let's start as we did with Ato Girmays, please.
Thank you. As mentioned earlier, the hoops and bumps that the Eritrean struggle and the Eritrean national identity and also sovereignty went through is just unbelievable, especially at times when one sits back to say, look, we have traveled this road. It really becomes one very disturbing, very deep, and also very checkered in many ways, that is intertwined with success and failure. And so therefore the lessons to be learned are quite robust. And there has also been, like Biniam said, trial and errors on some aspects as well. And over time, they perfected themselves into a meaningful entity or pillar into the way we went by. For me, I think the best and number one lesson that we learned in this resilience, especially during the struggle before independence, was that we have to do this on our own, and that was a lesson learned early on, and that was also the core of our mobilization in terms of weaving into the struggle the roles of the various players in the struggle. There was the army, there was the people, there were the women who were very, very strong participants in the entire struggle, both within the army and as well as community consciousness and other promotion works. So that ability to integrate not just the organized political leadership, but also the population in the various segments was a big lesson learned, that the participation of all is the key to joint success. And that participation for all also meant that during the struggle, especially starting at that point, we had literally broken the ice around the emancipation, the gender emancipation, especially the participation of women and young people in the livelihood of the country. The second lesson that I think is learned is, yes, they might manage to break our backs, they might manage to break our legs, our limbs, but if we stand on principle, without fooling anybody, without playing any kind of internal or external politics, without trying to appease anybody, if we do it for ourselves, then we will make it. And this, I think, has reached a stage at this point in time where now the world is beginning to see, okay, so they did survive. They said no. They said they want to do it themselves. They said they want to be self-reliant. They want to be the masters of their own destinies. And yes, they're beaten left and right, but they have survived. And I think now people are beginning to appreciate this, beginning to see this. And when you look at the kind of sacrifices that Eritrea had to pay, it was really the collective sacrifices for most Africa in the neo-colonial period. Basically, even though it was silenced in many ways from being the vanguard, from being the leader in many instances, it has managed to stay strong, because the lesson learned is it doesn't matter how hard and difficult it can get, but we will achieve what we have set out to achieve. The third lesson is probably our role and also our outreach, especially to Africa, which is also my big area of interest, but also to the world. We have also learned to be quiet. The leadership is very quiet in its relations with the world. The more you talk, the more you give away what you're all up. So your ability for surprise will be curtailed the more you talk. the more you have visitors, people who come into your capital left and right, all of a sudden now start to know your weak points, your strengths, and where you stay, what you do, and everything, then they will use that to undermine you further. So that level of guarded approach to our communication outward was also another very strong lesson learned. Now, I know there are different opinions about that. Why are you quiet? Why are you not reaching out to the continent? Why are you this? But I think again with the first lesson, depending on the human capital of the Eritrean overall, was the major focus of communication, and we did a lot of our global communication through our public diplomacy, through the Eritreans. No, there is no Eritrean supporter or opposition that cannot stand and speak about Eritrea and stand for Eritrea. Almost nobody, because Eritreans, like Biniam said earlier, don't think at any level but at the national level, but at the citizenship level, at the Eritrea level. Nobody, until we are reminded that we are from this tribe or that tribe or this religion or the other, nobody remembers that. Nobody even considers that as a factor in terms of our interaction. So the communication has been strong through mobilization, through sensitization, through all kinds of collective work for domestic projects and stuff like that. So that has been, I think, a good lesson. The third and probably also very important lesson learned is every Eritrean has understood that because of the unjust sanctions, harassment, isolation, and a very well thought through destruction of the Eritrean economy, Eritreans have learned that it is us who finance the country. It is us who run our programs. It is us who are responsible for everybody back home. Yes, and for the propaganda purposes, the fact that many young Eritreans have left Eritrea, of course, the numbers are all crazy numbers. There are also very many Ethiopians, especially from northern Ethiopia, who have also gone onto this massive movement, migration under the guise of Eritrean citizens. But whatever it is, the blessing in disguise is we have more ambassadors of Eritrea that look for the interest of Eritrea and that also contribute in the livelihood and survival of the country from wherever they are. So basically, it is an Eritrean consciousness, it's an Eritrean nationalism, well, not really nationalism, but patriotism, Eritrean identity that has relocated in terms of geography, but still continues to feed into the development of the country. And I think that has been the third and very important lesson learned. And the fourth one, and which is the shaky one, still is not properly and adequately understood, and adequate mobilization has not been done by the region, is this whole point of survival at the national level through your own self-integrity and your self-reliance, but also at the same time through this collaborative partnership of regional integration to provide and push, of course, the immediate threats and securities to a wider area in which common interests and common destinies are exercised together. And Eritrea has been the one and foremost country in the Horn of Africa, as you know, that has really been pushing for regional integration. Soon after the Eritrean independence in 1991, the push to convert IGAD from a small locust response agency to that of a regional economic and political entity was precisely to achieve that point. Maybe lessons probably need to be learned on whether that IGAD should have had everybody who geographically is located on the side of Africa, or whether we should have just focused on the Horn of Africa. But Eritrea's desire has always been a focus on the Horn of Africa, and it talked about the 5 countries whenever it talked about the Horn of Africa. Eritreans, if you have noticed, when they talk about Horn of Africa, they talk about Sudan, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Djibouti, and Somalia for all kinds of purposes and reasons, because the East African community that consisted of Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda has always been a cohesive body for a long time. And so therefore didn't include us, including South Sudan, that is, which is a new country now, and others. So therefore the mental frame and the economic structure and the political systems and everything greatly differ from the rest of these 5 countries that are in the proper Horn of Africa. So that is the other lesson that I think we learned. We have learned that we have to coexist with neighbors. Beyond that coexistence, we also have to collaborate deeply so that there is common interests are addressed together and that there is a higher level of integration that allows the development and dwelling in peace also of our 2 countries. To me, these are the things. The other ones, like we said earlier, it's intergenerational. Remember that it is very, very strong intergenerational linkage in terms of passing on the baton.
Thank you very much, really, Ato Girmays, for that. You have given us all the nationally, on a regional level, and then to the world, and particularly to the Horn of Africa, in various ways. What are the lessons learned and what we can pick from that. As you yourselves have said, it's an intergenerational process, this resilience. Now, what Dr. Biniam might pick as a lesson for his generation might not necessarily be what Ato Girmays, I think I really wanted to say for some reason, honorable Girmays, or what's proper, really. I really feel bad just saying.
That's fine.
I
That's
just
fine. Girma is fine. Don't worry.
Okay, so for you, Dr. Biniam, what are those key lessons learned from this resilience by the Eritrean people and the government as well, and that has rewarded from those picked lessons back to the people?
Thank you, Mahlet. You can drop the doctor and call me Biniam as well. I prefer that way. Yeah, it's much more easier, simpler, and I like it that way.
I will stick to that. I will say that. All right.
Yes, I think most of it has been beautifully captured by Girmay. Yeah, very concise. It just captures it more. There is one I would like to emphasize on is the idea of having to do it on your own. Yeah, there are multiple significant elements to them. Yeah, the idea of self-reliance. Yeah. So throughout that struggle, Eritreans wanted to do it on their own precisely because they recognize if you are dependent on somebody else, then they are going to use you for their own objective, not to facilitate your objective, but to use you rather as a cog. So when you do it, there is that element. You avoid being used by somebody else. Yeah, that's one element. Second element that's very important there is you accumulate a lesson, very important lessons, experience. Yeah, once you try to do it on your own, whether it's working on the machine in the machines, whether it's to build something, unless you touch it on your own, you experience it, then you won't be able to develop the necessary skill to be able to function properly. Even as a state, that's what's required. Yeah. So come in 1993, when the IMF and the World Bank came and said, we want to write a policy for you. The Eritrean leadership at the time said, no, we want to do it ourselves. But that was unusual for Africa. And IMF and World Bank, they told you, oh, okay, you knew, let's do it for you. because this is the norm in the continent. But the Eritrean leadership say, no, we want to do it on our own, because that's the lesson. Yeah, you experience this. Yeah, you by trying to do it yourself, you might make a mistake, but that's natural. So that element of trial and error is also part and parcel of this. Then the third element is this is very empowering. It's liberating. You're doing it on your own. So the self-empowerment element to it. So collectively, it becomes something that you would say, okay, we did it ourselves, not by depending on somebody else's support, or by depending on somebody else to do this for us. We did it ourselves. That's very important. It's very liberating, very empowering. And in addition to that, something that you can develop and build upon when you do it. If you're depending on somebody else, when they are not there, then you are incapacitated. You see, that's very crucial, and it's the biggest lesson. And the fourth element is it's very difficult. It's hard, but you have to endure. Yeah, the harder it gets, the most rewarding it becomes, because it's your fruit, your labor. And of course, the fifth element is it's when it is yours, it's easy to mobilize. Yeah, if it makes it easier for you to be responsive. Now you can take this throughout Eritrea's hardship of the last even 30 years and a struggle of 30 years for liberation, the 60 years framework. This has been weaved together. Yeah. So the last 30 years, with all the antagonism and sanction, all that, this lesson was very crucial in being able to combat this. Yeah, maneuver this. This is something that has been utilized throughout this, particularly the last 25 years when things have been very hard. The harder it is, let's do it. Yeah, we could do it. It's going to be tough, but we got to do it. Yeah, and the last element is no easy victory to be claimed. Yeah, you have to win it. If it is bad, you must acknowledge it is bad. If it hasn't worked, you must acknowledge it hasn't worked. If it has worked, then you will say, okay, how do we build on this? Yeah, that's what has been drawn into the last 32 years of Eritrean independence, and it has worked so far. And I think every Eritrean outside of the country is also, trying to emulate that. And I remember the Eritrean movement for democracy and human rights was, one of the civic movement that was established here. And then we were being accused for being trying to be self-reliant. We didn't recognize that this is what we were trying to do. We were very much worried about Western influence. We were very much worried about the TPLF's influence on us. We want to do it ourselves, and that lesson was, incorporated into even some of the opposition. I wouldn't say all of them. I don't know if they are the opposition anymore, but then those who are, criticizing the government have also embraced this element, which you could see that every Eritrean is now, it's a shared value in some sense, and I think that is the strength. Another one to add to this is the ways in which history had to be appropriated, understood, and exploited. History has its own dirt. History has full of blood and full of surprises, full of fruits and happiness, and mixed with a whole lot of gory stuff. Yeah. Now, how do we bring it to the present? Unless you are very careful in bringing that history into the present, you are going to pay a heavy price. Yeah, it could be divisive. It could be used to create cleavages. Yeah. So how you appropriate history? So godly leaders, and I'm sure Giramay would assist me on this one. They've very careful in bringing what kind of history that you would bring to the present and to the future. So investing on today to move forward is the most important way of engaging with the past. Yes, so the past is there only to draw a lesson, not to bring it here and carry it as a burden to go forward. That's why it is so easy for this leadership, maybe with a lot of pain, but then, okay, we had this, but then we can move forward. Yeah. We can engage with Ethiopia, build regional alliances, despite them having this and that against us. We can leave that to history, but then we can invest on today so that we have peaceful coexistence, so that we have a better future. And that kind of investment is needed. And I see, and many African states are still dwelling in history, and then trying to rip it apart and become very divisive. Yeah. So how history is appropriated, and they have been very careful. And the Eritreans are very careful in choosing what kind of history that they bring to the present, and the investment that is needed here, so that we have a better future. And I think that's very crucial element to add here. Thank you, Mahlet.
Thank you, Brother Biniam. Yeah, a lot of lessons, really. I mean, as I sit here, I always say this to Brother Biniam and others who are guests here. There's a lot of things, preparation, talking, and anxiety. But as I sit here behind this screen, there is a lot to learn every day on every subject that even we take sometimes for granted. And as I listen to you, we just talked on maybe a couple of questions. Feel like this really has to be shared by many others, because we know so little. Even me as an Ethiopian, who is compared to other African countries much closer to the Eritreans, we know very little or none for that matter. So really I'm blessed and I'm very happy to have you here. I just wanted to reflect on something, self-reliance. Here also in the comment section, there is, I think Miss Razia said, as challenging, or in bracket, putting it mildly, as it has been for Eritreans to do it, in quotation, on your own, as you said, I think it was Ato Girmays. I believe that this is what has created unprecedented transgenerational resilience, cohesion, and self-reliance. I think that we all agree to that. And then there was one thing Ato Girmays raised before. We all think, you say that we all think, meaning Eritreans, as Eritreans, there's no other way to think of it up until we are reminded we are from this ethnicity or from that religion. And how beautiful is that? For me, I mean, we all know that Ethiopia, how it is torn apart by ethnicity, and for me, I was never, growing up, I was never taught anything else but that I am an Ethiopian. That was it. And recently, when I was in the university over here, somebody asked me, I mean, who's not Ethiopian, actually, the student happens to be from Italy, and he said, but Mahlet, what is the problem if you are, if you grew up, you are from this, if like to magnify, to glorify the ethnic group that you come from? No, I don't want that. But the question hit me, and for some time I was thinking, like, was I wrong? I mean, just to think as an Ethiopian, is everybody thinking like this? I think if we really want to unite the country, and also in a bigger picture Africa, I don't think we should dwell in that ethnicity. And I think it's a right way of building a nation, to make them to think as an Eritrean or as an Ethiopian or as Kenyan, rather than they go and hide in their own ethnic groups which are very ready to be a state by their own, with all their language, their territory, their flag, everything, like a state. Yeah, I just wanted to reflect on that. Now, on the same topic, talking about resilience,
Sorry,
let's go.
Mahlet.
Sorry.
Sorry, Mahlet. Yeah, let me also add one thing, because
Okay.
you really raised very important thing. This issue of ethnicity, both in Eritrea and in Africa. You know, in Eritrea, these are the 80 years starting during the colonial period that has gone on in terms of the difficult phases of self-conscious struggles on and about these issues, especially the ethnicity, religion, and so on. There was this motive towards a unified thinking, because what had happened during the Italian occupation of Eritrea is it didn't take a lot of time for the Italians to really consolidate Eritrea, because the kind of resistance they were getting from the population was not the kind of resistance that they were expecting. The first move was to protect our culture, to protect our religion, to protect our collective survival. And the Bahar Nagash kingdom was one that had literally centralized what we call today Eritrea, this whole area, as a unit that has come together to fight off the feudal lords that were coming from Tigray and other places in terms of invasion and looting and what have you. So it has started from that point. So the fact that there was this Italian occupation that has now given a more definitive identity to this place and this people had also sparked off this understanding that we are under, one people and with one interest. So it kicks off from there. Many other African countries that were under colonial rule never had that opportunity. The struggle they had for themselves and around them is the fact that they have all these colonized countries bordering them. All these communities are divided by the same colonial powers and shared colonial powers. And so therefore there is no place of refuge for these people. But for Eritreans who really got it bad with the Italians, they had Ethiopia as a place of refuge to go to. This country was not colonized, and also a lot of Eritreans, like Abrahadabot and all these people that were following the Italians all the way to Ethiopia to throw bombs at them. This was part of that Pan-Africanism that Eritreans developed over and top that of their identity. One of our biggest failure in our Pan-African movement today, as we speak, is because not many of those countries have achieved that level of citizenship identity. And Pan-Africanism is a concept built on these colonial states, nation states, to come together as nation states. But the nation states do not have that level of development or take themselves as non-tribal identities. That level of identity as a citizen has not been achieved. And this is where the struggle is all the time. We never go past this thing. Ethiopia, again, has its own history, has its own, especially feudal history and civilization histories that were based on supremacy of one over the other, not necessarily a colluded identity that has become something of a commonly shared identity. The one instance in the Ethiopian history, for instance, that brought that Ethiopian identity strong and to the fore is when as Tedros established this Tobia. He came with a flag. He got all the kings to now be centered around one king of kings, one emperor. He, the semblance of a nation came at around that time, because they too now were killing each other through the support of external powers that were giving this one arms and that one that, and blockading this and blockading that. And all these were happening, but he was the first one to really think about a united state of Ethiopia. And this is where many other African countries did not have a chance. Even in those that have had the longest period of colonial, I think look at South Africa, for instance, Biniam Misgun. It's really difficult to think outside of tribes. It's really difficult because that level of internal struggle and process to create that collective identity has never been done, and the movement has never taken place. And again, in Africa, we will suffer for a longer period of time. And then we had also some very evil forces like in Ethiopia, where they came up with an ethnic federation, formalized it even by law and constitution, to think tribal, to think ethnic, to kill each other. It's okay to fight. You see, it has gone that opposite direction in terms of building institutions to build Ethiopianism, to build identity, common identity. They built institutions to divide, and they legitimize that. And other countries, they probably may not have legitimized that in their constitutions, but in the politics, the political parties, the political, the events that happen, the kind of gatherings they have, they're all ethnic. You go to Nigeria, you know by just looking at one political party, which particular region it's representing. The same with Kenya, the same with many other these places. Maybe Tanzania is the only one country that may have been spared from such level of politics. But again, that level of development towards a collective identity as citizens never took place. And Pan-Africanism, that's why we will not win the way we are now. We will not win. All the frontline Pan-Africanists that you interview all the time, that I see them a lot, they are built on that political consciousness designed and understood and written by the fathers, or what we call the fathers of our African independence. But these fathers at that time, including many Eritreans, were thinking of nation state in their minds. They were not thinking of religions. They were not thinking of tribes. That cannot be delivered at this point in time. A lot of Ethiopia's move soon after Second World War to support African liberations, African liberation fronts, and so on, were really engineered and pushed and presented to the emperor to take as a policy by many of the Eritreans that joined the Ethiopian government at that time. So this is where we think we have now become very unique in terms of what we see in Eritrea, and among the thinking of the population and the thinking at the individual level. No Eritrean, I guarantee you, no Eritrean goes to bed thinking I'm Muslim or Christian or this tribe. And no Eritrean wakes up in the morning to say I am Tigray or Tigrinya or whatever. None. It doesn't happen like that. So I just wanted to add that.
No, I'm glad you interrupted. You came in. It was really good to hear that. And from now on, I will not feel. Sometimes, I hold myself like I was guilty. Thank you, really, thank you. But again, it is still really, because we lived so much in this ethnic federalism for the past 3 decades here in Ethiopia. It's really hard for me, even as a Pan-Africanist, to think how an African cannot think of its ethnic group, how you can build up such a nation. I mean, that assurance now that you are telling me, no African, I guarantee you, no Eritrean will go to bed thinking I am from this or I am from that. What an achievement. I mean, really, congratulations to the government and to the people. There's a lot, I mean, we have to admit there is a lot of lessons to be learned from Eritrea. As I hear you, I feel like a book has to be written. This knowledge has to be shared. But again, here and there, we have mentioned it. It's a shy government, a shy people. Why? We will find out now. So please tune in because we will also answer that question. So talking about of Africa and still in light of resilience, meaning Eritrea's resilience, what potential lessons can African nations draw from its experience, and how has this influenced the nation of Eritrea itself? Maybe you have touched this already, but in a broader way, how has this influenced the broader African contexts?
Yeah, let's hear from Biniam on that one first.
Okay.
Because he spends his days, researching those things.
Um, yes. Okay. Yeah. There is something to learn, but also it's important to remember that Eritrea was also learning from other Africans. Yeah, other African experiences. The very point you mentioned about ethnicity. Yeah, and understanding of the nation state. Yeah, there's so much lesson learned. Yeah. From other African mistakes as well. This is how our Eritrean own mistake as well as other African mistakes. So to rectify that, we have to invest in a common narrative, yeah, that brings us together. And the more you invest on that, the more it becomes solid and it gains salience. Yeah, it is not to eliminate other differences, but rather to embrace them, but also recognize building a nation requires a common narrative and wanting to build a common future, define your own destiny. That's very important. So the lesson goes back and forth. But particularly with the self-reliance, there's a lot that Eritrea tried to learn from the Tanzanian experience as well, but also own experience as well. That was very important. Now, in the Tanzanian experience, I see that they weren't that much of class sensitive in the ways in which it has been mobilized. There's elitist element to it, but then there are masses being mobilized. In the Eritrean case, there is class sensitive element, pro-poor, trying to establish social justice across the board, yeah, mobilizing everyone. And then this can facilitate ways in which all of us could benefit from it, and then we have faith in the process as well. If everybody is benefiting, and more or less we are in a similar level, that we could see that we could go to through these steps and build a better future. So that element, being very sensitive to inequality, was very important, and I think many African states should learn from that. Any country that doesn't deal with inequality in the way Eritrea is doing, it's going to have serious problem all the time. Yeah. This is the same problem that we see here in South Africa. This is the same problem that has been a problem to social cohesion in Ethiopia, and that you have to address. The other element is using the state power to enrich yourself has in fact fade into this ethnic tensions that we're looking at. Of course, we borrowed some of it from the colonial practice, but other elements is that the post-colonial states, as occupied by local elites, and the ways in which they try to somehow enrich themselves. And then that would be facilitated using your own ethnic group to help you prop up and occupy the state power so that you accumulate more. And that's what Eritrea tries to avoid. In fact, you see the leaders, all of them, they living in government-owned houses. We don't have palaces. We don't have massive villas with swimming pool and this and that. That I think our Africans must pick it up. Yeah, that kind of commitment to being egalitarian, being well shared resource for all of us. Yeah, we here as servants, and we're going to contribute as much as we can to the well-being of the nation and the masses. And that kind of commitment, I think other Africans need to pick up on it. And the other element is self-reliance. I think we need to emphasize that even many of those governments that are incorporating developmental states approach to their development, they would need that self-reliance. Remember, developmental state requires self-reliance. You want to learn the technology, adopt it, make it your own. Yeah, that's the only way you do it. South Korea did it in a similar way. Taiwan did it in the same way by being self-reliant. You bring it let's just be clear. Self-reliant doesn't mean you reject outside aid assistance. It means only facilitating growth at locally. Yeah. First, you mobilize your own energy, your own resource. Then, when you need more, you bring in, support from outside. So, unless we adopt this as part of this project, learn to do it on our own, learn from our experience, from our mistake, accumulate experience, accumulate knowledge and know-how and skill necessary to lift us off this kind of multiple challenges we face. I think we're going to have a serious problem in the coming decade as well. Yeah. So I think this is something that we can export to the rest of Africa. But it's always important to remember what Eritrea has learned is it's also from other Africans. Yeah. And the Pan-Africanist element to what Eritrea talks about today, or early in the 90s, was also, by embracing what Kwame Nkrumah has did, yeah, by reading Fanon, and I'm sure Giramay would tell us it, but Frantz Fanon was very useful in allowing Eritrean leaders to think through, what does it mean to have a post-colony? How do you run a post, a liberation state? What are the modalities that needed to be adopted? So it is within this kind of format that we have to understand Eritrea's contribution and lesson that it has drawn from Africa and also contributing to Africa. I think I leave the rest to Giramay, and I'm sure he would help us out, tease them out a bit more for us.
Yeah, no, that's perfect, Biniam, and I think it is that ability to learn from each other probably that will help us in terms of identifying at the national level what are the core issues for development. Like you said, during the war for independence, there was a lot of political education because a politicized population that knows its purpose and its objectives is a population that will help you transcend into the next level and achieve what you have set out to do. And this has been the course. So in that, every Eritrean freedom fighter was educated on the struggle by Frelimo in Mozambique, the struggle by the Tanzanians under the leadership of Nyerere, the struggle of the Algerians, and all these readings of Frank Fanon, like you said, and also Algerians themselves, and then that of Angola, and then that of DRC at the time, Congo, Zaire, and ANC in South Africa. The Zimbabwe one came much later for us, and it started and ended almost very quickly. But these liberation movements, we used to analyze and study. And then from Asia, we borrowed, teachings from the China Revolution, from the Vietnam Revolution, from Laos Revolution, and Koreans also. So there was a very good understanding of where the African movements were at, what they failed in, what they succeeded in, and what it is that we needed to learn. So we also made contacts with these during the liberation period, and had very good relations with Frelimo and the SWAPO in Namibia, and so on. So we had canvassed greatly all these countries that struggled in the same way that we did. So what is the lesson now? Because one of the primary objectives of our struggle was to open equal participation to all Eritreans, to all ethnic groups, to all religious groups, to all genders, to everybody that existed in that country. Participation for us was a duty that every single Eritrean had to pick up in order to be able to claim their rights. You cannot claim, in our thinking, any right unless you have first done your duty. And this is the thinking we had. And so as we progressed into independence, and then also through the challenges in the post-independence challenges, this whole issue of we still have a duty to do. And it is when we do our duty that we can ask for our rights still exists. It still runs the whole framework that we have as a nation. And maybe this is where some lessons could be picked by our African brothers and sisters. We have seen independence in many African countries, so-called independence, that probably has not really paid the dividend for the bigger population. In Eritrea, we have a pro-poor centric thinking, and so therefore we believe in development from the periphery towards the capital. And if you go to Eritrea today, in the peripheries, they have 24-hour electricity access, they have water access and everything. But in Asmara, you don't have 24 hours electricity, you don't have water running through the pipe, 24 hours, simply because, and even if you see some pictures of the city, you see some very old buildings and stuff like that that have not been painted and made up. No, the idea is the strength of the development of the main cities, rides on the back of the development in the rural area. So today, as we speak, Eritrea has harvested water at a security of up to 5 years per capita. If there is no rain for 5 years, there will be water available on per capita basis. So this is a good achievement and something that also looks at the longer term development strategy that the country may adopt as it goes forward. So other countries need to start to learn to what extent have they trapped their population from becoming part and participate in the economic development of the country and growth of the country. What is it that is holding them back? One big thing is corruption, for example. Corruption is screaming off not what the continent has generated as wealth, but also what it can generate as wealth for the next 30, 40, 50 years. We're in debt beyond any kind of belief. Not even a third, fourth generation from now can finish paying it off. We have that situation. And it shows that the populations are fine-tuned into this, we need help thinking, not that we can do it ourselves thinking. In a country that I spend a lot of my time in Southern Africa, it's one of the richest countries. It has mineral riches, it has human capital, it has all kinds of. This country is under sanctions and it's being played left and right, but nobody can really say how the wealth of this country is being managed to support the development of the country. To begin with, not everybody knows what wealth they have, where the wealth is at this moment. So I think the lesson from Eritrea is, because many have inherited colonial structures as governments, and the colonial structured governments have been governments to exploit, to take, not to give and serve, like in public service and civil service thing. A lot of the structures of the government continue to allow an open door to corruption and drainage of wealth. And second thing is our relations as African states, and also our relations with the other world. If a nation economic framework is built on input of finances through debt and other means, then definitely you're not really talking about your own economy. What you need to do is you need to generate your own wealth and try to live within that framework in order to be able to generate more wealth. I mean, unless we see many countries going into that thing, they continuously, perpetually become dependent on external resources that they get, but never get to use for whatever they implement, they plan, but lose that resources through various drainage systems that they have developed. So this is one. So integrity is important. If I may also, take the liberty to use Ethiopia as an example. Sitting here and thinking of Ethiopia, you just wonder, what exactly is it that Ethiopia doesn't have to be not only a rich country, but even a strong country? What? People. There are many educated Ethiopians. There is a big population, so this country does not even need anybody else's market. And it's a huge market there. So much natural resources, especially so much natural clean water. This country can feed the world. Little Ukraine is feeding the world with wheat, or at least they believe they do. Imagine what Ethiopia can do. And then this continuous cycle of drought. Isn't it an ancient state? Isn't it an ancient state that has lived through droughts, wars, and others? What other lesson does this country need? It all boils down to a completely poor, undeserved leadership that this country successively has been getting until this point. And this is what is killing this country. Not only is it killing this country, but this country has also become a problem for everybody in the region. So we have a Horn of Africa region that is being constantly put under turmoil. And one of the main drivers of this turmoil in this region is Ethiopia. For what reason is that happening? Which country, tell me, which country around Ethiopia is a threat to Ethiopia? None. So this is what people have to learn. If we need to stand up to anybody else in order to preserve this country, if you need to do things differently in order to make sure that the wealth of the country is inward looking, then there has to be some real shift in terms of thinking. You don't need to go very far for good examples. You don't need to go very far for what it is like to struggle to stand on your own feet, to feed your own self without having to beg from your neighbor all the time or from somebody else all the time. That pride, that sense of achievement. Eritreans are not rich people. We're not rich. We're poor people. We suffer a lot. We went through very, very difficult period, not only during the Liberation War, but even after independence. Some now turn the table around and they say, you see, you have not even been able to achieve anything as Eritreans. Of course, the ones who accuse us of doing that are the very ones who have plotted to make sure that we don't get up, that we have no economy, that we have no strength as a nation, and that we are totally disorganized. So this is what happens. So that resilience is important. The resilience in the mind, especially of the leadership. There is a huge budding young population in Ethiopia that can be transformed into such a productive force. Time is being lost on young people. Opportunities are being lost for people. And this country, we have these, interesting things that we hear every now and then, especially around the Adwa battle celebration. Yes, there was a great battle. And then you hear this OAU thing. Yeah, we are the beacon of Africa. We do it. But then in the end of the day, none of that trickles down to make that Ethiopian on the street a resilient person. It's a wasted opportunity for everybody. It's a wasted opportunity. Yes, we have issues of poverty. We have already found ourselves in a big debt for many, many years to come. Yes, all that. No, but leadership has to draw the line. It just has to draw the line. So these are the lessons that really could be learned from Eritrea. Not all of Eritrea's traveled road may be the best example or the best lesson for everybody, because the situations vary from country to country. But that doesn't mean that no learning can be done. We are just neighbors, just one tiny little border between us, and then we are people here. We talk. Mahlet, you're a young person. I was born and raised in Ethiopia. I'm even more Ethiopian than you are. I mean, I even feel more, connected to Ethiopia in that sense than anybody else. But this is where we keep failing as a continent. None of them are learning. All of them are going behind the other to undo, beat the other to get more money here that's going to be stolen in the end of the day. Why does money need to be stolen? Why? Well, why are government officials, living in a kind of life that requires a lot of continuous income, and so therefore they go into all kinds of corruption, and they still, remain as leaders as that without any consequence. I mean, Ethiopia again is another very good example. The TPLF government literally drained the country of every single bit of money it had. These guys walked away. They walked away, and they still now even there to administer the region. They're making noise that this is. I know this is just too much. There's too much, and this is happening everywhere. So deep lessons to be learned, but more conversations to also be had. I hope you, as you continue to progress in this program, you'll also be able to host panels. One from Somalia, one from Eritrea, one from Ethiopia, one from Sudan. Together, we need to discuss our issues together.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Ato Girmays. Really, that question so resonated with me. What Ethiopia don't have, the mistakes, the war, everything there is. It's everything. I mean, aside the resources, there is everything there for Ethiopia to pick, dust it off, lesson taken, and go forward. But then again, and that brought tears to my eyes. And thank you for sharing. It's really important. Yeah. And I was also born in Eritrea, but as a very child, and my parents in a very beautiful port city in Assab. And I have very little memory, but I never felt that I did not belong to Eritrea up until Eritrea because of that war. Very interesting discussion. Thank you. And I'm very, very happy that I feel really blessed. And I really want every other African people to listen to this. Moving on, Eritrea has been described relatively a quiet or a shy nation in terms of media, not only nation, including the government as well, in terms of media presence. What factors do you think it contributed to this perception, and how it has impacted Eritrea's relationship with the international community?
This will be for you, I think. You
right.
will be supposed to respond to this one.
Please.
Okay.
Ato Girmays.
Yeah. Like I said earlier, this reservedness on the media again comes from this very long background of an independence war that we had to fight alone and win alone. The element of surprise has always been at the core of our thinking. And second thing is also there is a saying in our local language which says that one who works doesn't need to talk because the work will show what he or she is all about. And it is a very deeply appreciated value among the Eritrean community. And also culturally, and also as a result of this long struggle, Eritreans are also very shy to talk about themselves. If I am a good person, a bad person, I will never say I'm like this. It's always somebody else will say what. Because when somebody else says, despite the possibility and chance of a bias, the chances are that people will not even think of being biased. They will tell you straight in your face exactly what they think or what the truth is. So therefore, that is also a cultural thing that is in our DNA. Whenever we try to speak out, we always find it difficult also. We struggle to speak out. So today, we are in a situation where probably the world has started to open up in terms of noticing what is going on in Eritrea, seeing now Eritreans stand and what the dividends are for that, and so on. So when it comes to themselves, they see exactly how it is and what had happened. So therefore, I think it is becoming a little more easier to open up in terms of communication. For example, if with this war between the federal government and TPLF did not take place, and if Ethiopians have not really witnessed how shortchanged they had become, if Ethiopians have not seen the level of fake news that was being generated and thrown around all over the place, if Ethiopians did not see the pinch of sanctions and suspension from AGOA and all those things, would they have been able to appreciate and understand Eritrea today? No. How do you explain when you have gone through the worst to somebody that has not even had a fraction of it? It's very difficult. Having said that, but then also in terms of communication internally, the leadership and population, very strong communication, very strong interaction, continuous on a daily basis. It happens whenever leaders travel. There's always a meeting of Eritreans wherever they are. There's always an exchange of views, and Eritrean discussions are centered around criticism and self-criticism. So there's always that opportunity to recalibrate and improve things as we go. So therefore, that communication outward has barred Eritrea from quite a number of, shall I say, opportunity to shine or opportunity to be heard, maybe. But we fought the biggest platforms where nobody has been to, the Human Rights Council in Geneva. No other African country, no other country has had it like Eritrea. The whole establishment was pulled together to just squash Eritrea. Why? Because when they had the sanctions, the UN sanctions on Eritrea, and when the monitoring group continuously reported back to say that there is no evidence that Eritrea had supported Al-Shabaab, there is no evidence that Eritrea has been found a culprit in any of these issues that have been listed on the sanctions, they would say, yes, we know, but that country, the arrogance of that country, the fact that it has not submitted to us, the fact that it has not submitted to our international standards, must suffer the consequences. So that was the battle that was being waged. So therefore, trying to really hit the media and be able to go in that space was rather difficult and also maybe unhelpful to a point. Another good example is, if you remember, just before the war started in Ethiopia, the Ayele leaders, the TPLF leaders, were talking about Eritrea as there is nothing, just only old people left, all young people are gone. They are just, and there was this guy who would say, we'll go to Mafaka and that kind of stuff. And that absence from the media probably contributed to that, and only to surprise everybody. Today, You go to Ethiopia and you speak with any one of those Ethiopian generals, and they will tell you it is a bad idea to go to war with Eritrea from now on. So this is what the dividends were, and this is what the cultural end in terms of that long experience, because we had to fight our war of independence alone, because we had to do everything alone. We were just focused on each other and not so much of this media. When I went to fight, to join the EPLF, I was a student in Addis, and we had a very strong student body in those days. That would be your parents' days, I'm sure, for you, Mahlet. That we were very intelligent, very action-oriented. We were highly organized, very politicized, analytical. We can create organizations like what we have created, to wage big wars and win big armies. And at that time, I was young, and I used to think, because we're so active, I used to think that all Eritreans were like me, educated, active, what. And when I went to join the struggle, it was the shock of my life to realize that more than 85% of my colleagues were uneducated. It was, until today, every time I think of that, there's something in me that just turns. It really took my morale away. It really took, I said, so there is a lot of work to do. So I immediately, as I left a training camp, I was deployed to teach not academics, but letters. Hahu, this is how it was. And with that, with the few people that were capable, we managed to organize the entire organization, bring up the levels of consciousness and understanding and literacy of all the fighters, and through the fighters to the communities. This is what happened. Today, Mahlet, today, as you and I sit here and speak, you will not find a single 18-year-old Eritrean that has not finished high school. This is how it is. And that now has brought Eritrea among the top literate countries in Africa, and the highest per capita graduates from university. This is what today we have the Biniams. You think that, passing on is not a pride this time? It is. Because this country has completely transformed. Now with this transformation and with this new generation really being able to speak with the world, and this culture of how to manage that communication with the world, and how to also transform the Eritrean psychology into being part and parcel of this dialogue and conversation and discourse that takes place, is probably now what is emerging as we go now. So this is the thing about the Eritrean silence, I tell you.
Thank you very much, Ato Girmays. Brother Biniam, do you think the quietness or this shyness by the Eritrean government in the people has made Eritrea to lose, or rather made Eritrea to gain from it?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag. I'm sure Giramay has also pointed to that fact. Element of a surprise not being known. It's part of its strengths. Yeah, even if you make an error, you can rectify it. Without huge fanfare. But also you would be losing an other element. So when people think about Eritrea as a tourist destination, with all this negative news around the world, all the major media outlets, and I have to say this, Eritrea has received undue attention, unlike any other state in this continent, undue media attention, all negative, And of course, to my understanding, it is very difficult to even respond to all of them. The kind of media campaigns that keep coming out in different forms, using tabloids, using institutions that they call NGOs, and then they write. We call them angels. They're not quite angels. We know for a fact they've been funded by one or the other governments. So they keep on cooking this, and then Eritrea doesn't have the resource to be able to respond to all of them. In addition to choosing to be quiet, it has also forced Eritrea to be even more quiet. Yeah, because now what do? You just focus on yourself. Know your own strengths, know your own weakness, and invest in that. Yeah, but there are things that Eritrea would lose as well. Investment, for example, if it is a negative media campaign, just sanction. Which company would be willing to come to Eritrea, even though that sanction wouldn't affect that particular company or that particular potential investor? It would shy away precisely because this word is associated with this country. And now I'm sure you've heard in the last couple of days, then while we celebrate Independence Day, they came up. Eritrea is one of the top countries that have modern day slavery. What does that mean, really? What does that mean? And then, of course, all this media outlets, propaganda tools of the West, just sharing them up, including Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera is effectively owned by the West, literally, just it's become their propaganda move, and they keep sharing that, keep on responding. It tires you. It wears you down. So not engaging, not investing in that, focusing on what you can do, what you do best is also a good thing. But by not being able to also bring you based out and forcing it, creating a space to communicate that is also sometimes, it's quite a challenge. Yeah. There are things that you would lose as a consequence of that. I keep telling my colleagues and people that I know, networks, that Eritrea is this country. Eritrea is this kind of country. I haven't heard of this. They keep telling me that, why don't you guys, write this piece and then this newspaper? Which newspaper actually accept anything decent written about Eritrea? Each time they receive something, are you sure about this? Yeah, they'll be reluctant, and then they will try to bring in something negative, within it, and then it takes away the element that you want to portray about Eritrea. It has its own challenges, but it is also so many good things going for it. But it's a big challenge, and of course, many of those platforms are not offered to Eritrea. But whenever it has been offered, I think particularly my generation would like to make that opportunity. And I'm sure you've seen us, and Twitter, we're new to it, but we try to engage in as much as we can. But we know why the government does what it does, why this particular leadership, and I think I need to say also this particular crop of leaders that we have in Eritrea, they have that background, that experience, and then, of course, the cultural element, as Girmays has mentioned, let the work speak for itself. And of course, today the work is speaking for itself, and many are recognizing that. They could see the potential, and its detractors are ever more antagonistic, precisely because they could see this as happening. I remember reading one particular article, and in that article, this somebody who works in a big mining company, and so arrogantly said, why does this small country demands 40% share for the mines? As if this is our resource and we're not entitled to that. Royalty, 5% or 10% is just good enough for Eritrea. This is a small, tiny country, shouldn't be asking a share in the business. I was shocked, this is our resource and you cannot make a demand on that, but this is what they used to. Yeah. And then more African countries are also recognizing this is very important. We want to create our sovereign wealth, build on it. Slowly, a lot of African states are also picking up on this, but Eritrea is proving that it is a resilient state. It has a better standing, and its future is promising in many respects. But then this is not achieved without pain, without enduring pain and this hardship collectively shared, and that is very important. This story had to be told, and of course, we keep telling our seniors like Giramay, you guys should write this. It needs to be communicated what you went through in the struggle, as well as the last 30 years. It's very important to talk about it. But I keep telling us, okay, wait, we'll do it, but in due course. We'll do it, but in due course. Even president doesn't have any biography. And look at how many biographies have been written about sitting president already. Even sitting presidents are writing books, right? But we don't see this happening. All the generals should have been writing something, but we're not getting that as well. But that lesson had to be somehow transferred, not only to us Eritreans, but also be shared by the rest of the continent and the world. And there's so much of the story that has to be told. We obviously we have to somehow find a way to do that in the best way we can.
Yeah.
This is what I mean. You see, the educated generation, they're demanding for documented history. They're demanding for all these things. This is where we are today, and it really, really makes me happy. And again, it's a loss. It's a gain. We're not good at speaking up. At least the government struggles with that. Basically because they know a lot of this narrative that's being developed is being done deliberately. It's being generated by these intelligence organizations to demonize Eritrea and its leadership. It's a deliberate thing. So why should we just go onto their platform and get our necks cut off? It is their thing. We need to drag them to ours. We need to do our thing, and we have to win by what we do. If you walk around Eritrea today, as impoverished as we say we think we are, it's a nation that has complete free health to tertiary level for everybody. It's a nation that has free education to tertiary level, free. It's a nation where everybody pays taxes. There is no evasion of taxes. It is a nation where everybody contributes willingly whenever those times are required. It's a nation where nobody steals public money, where it's not siphoned off to anything else. But because of that lack of corruption, because of that ability to cohesively work towards a common goal, as poor as we may be, we can still afford to give free health service to everybody and free education to everybody. So this is what we say. So whenever we talk about communication, yes, we can't be talking a lot to attract direct investment into the country, because we are locked by this sanction, especially by the US sanctions, from being part of the SWIFT system. So even if we generate wealth that has a lot of money, like we do through our mines and everything, we have not been able to utilize it effectively because of all these obstructions. So why do we need to go talk about this? Just go and work with those that are willing to work with us, because Eritrea is all about partnership. Its self-reliance policy is not a policy of self-isolation. It's a policy of wanting to do on principle what you need to do for yourself and finding the right kind of partner to be able to work with you. So if you see it from that point of view, the fact that this country has not been communicating openly a lot probably may have lost many things, but what it needed to do and what it zeroed in, it did. It has very good partnership with the Eastern Bloc, for instance, good trade going on, good collaboration going on. We have seen also quite a number of investments in the mining sector. Now we're beginning to see investments in the fishing and the port area. So what matters to us is happening. This is the thinking. And then also building a very strong national defense capacity. We have demonstrated more than enough what we can do to protect ourselves, and now to also protect our neighbors if we see that there is a national threat for disintegration in those nations. We will do. So I think all these capacities are there, and for many it says because we don't talk too much and we just do our job, we are where we are and we know where we are. So that is one of the cultures in this leadership that have been very difficult to break. We try a lot, we try to push them to appear on this, to appear on that. I say, no, these platforms are not for us. They will take us, they will bash us. One good example they're using of recent experience is a visit by President Isaias to Kenya. The visit was very successful. I mean, there was a lot of goodwill, and there's a lot of coordination, and there's a lot of understanding and identification of common objectives and common interests and so on. But then when it was time to go and meet the press, then there were these three AP, remind me, was this BBC or was the other one? They were just coordinated, the reporters. And they were the only ones who asked questions. And they asked why there is no election in Eritrea. For one who has followed the Eritrean history and what has happened, you come and talk about election. That is definitely a Western talk. It's not an agenda for the people. When we see the level of trust, the level of participation, and the struggle the country had to go through to survive all this onslaught on it. If it was not this leadership, nobody else would have done it. No elected government, some political party that had all kinds of side interests and everything would have done this. So people know our time will come for elections. Our time will come for political parties, but we want to do it our way. We want to do it according to our standards. We want to do it according to our, psychological makeup and also what adds value to the country. We don't want to copy something and then bring it here and destroy ourselves. There was an interview with Al Jazeera way back when they were asking him, when is the next election going to take place? So I don't know. The president, maybe 50 years, even more. I don't know, because he is saying, we don't need your kind of elections. We will have our own kind of elections. So I think from where we have come from and where we have traveled to at this point in time, I think in hindsight, it seems to be justified, including the silence, the media silence, to a certain extent. But now I think we have a population that is highly educated, very capable population that seems to know and understand the world, be part of the world. I think it will be different going forward.
Yeah. Can I add to what you Girmays just said? It's very important to think through democracy and democratic processes as being organic, and therefore owned by the people. If it is something that you import wholesale from somewhere else, it never works, and that's why we see so many failed democratic experiments in the continent. And so Eritrea chose first, you have to create citizens that are conscious, capable of handling themselves, and of course bring them to the middle class status, and that knows its interest. Unless you do that, then elections are going to be used by power-hungry individuals, and abuse and misuse it. And there are small-scale experiments that are happening at the local level, local government level. And that's where the state is the most felt in any country. So if you have a decent participation and engagement and you choose your own people at that local level, that's very important experiment. So this requires a lesson, turning it into a culture, that's something that they own, part of them. It's a process, not just wholesale imported and the way Americans do it. And America is not a democracy. Parties are owned by other interests that are operating behind the closed doors, so they give everybody a circus, and then in the end, the casino wins, right? You play, you gamble, and then you choose, and then the casino wins. So the people behind that are running the show are always winning. And Eritrea refuses to take part in that. I mean, President Isaias, if he wants to be elected every 4 years, can organize a circus election. It's all circus everywhere, as we see it, but that's not what this government has decided. Let's do it the way we would like to do it and pace it bit by bit. As the experience starts to grow, we scale it up. As we learn more about it, refine it, and then we take it to the next level. That's how it should be. And Eritrea has an experience with democracy. Eritrea is not new to democracy. Yeah, even if in its narrow sense, in the 1950s under the federation, Eritrea used to have its own parliament and all that. Yeah, it's not new to Eritreans, but then there are lessons learned from that. There are also lessons learned from other African states, and this particular government has in fact decided we want to have election, we want to have the constitution start in earnest. It started it in the post-independent period, but then the conflict erupted, and then the antagonism started to be escalated. I mean, the war just ended, but and supposedly ended in 2000, but that war had continued in a different form. Yeah, maybe we didn't have the physical war; it was happening again, in parts and pieces, in a small scale. But then the war was there, and the war of attrition of different kind, if you like. So within this context, what kind of election can you have? Election that can be manipulated, that could be used to divide people and to inject ethnic sentiments, subnational sentiments that would be exploited to weaken the country. So it is always important to recognize that this can only work better when it is paced properly, handled with some kind of understanding of your own community, your own society, and to respond to your own needs and aspirations. Otherwise, you just bring in what the Germans are doing. It's not going to work for you. And many academics are recognizing that democracy, I mean, this competitive election particularly is failing. And democracy in other form can happen. And I would argue, element of what we call democracy is already formed in Eritrea. That egalitarian project that's wanting to participate everyone. First, let's bring in the marginalized into the center. All that is part of what democracy needs. And unless we do that, unless we recognize this is the way to do it, we will always have this failed experiments, yeah? And always then the ethnic, mob sentiments being used for those who are wanting to occupy the state power so that they accumulate, personal wealth. And that we don't want in Eritrea. And I completely agree with what's happening and by way of opening up the political process in the country.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Brother Biniam and Ato Girmays, for that. Let me just read some of the comments here. Miss Razia said, I understand why Eritrea had to maintain the element of surprise during the armed struggle for independence and the subsequent border war and geopolitical war to isolate Eritrea. And she continues, that said, the silence has also served to advance all the misinformation and disinformation on Eritrea. What can Eritrea do differently going forward whilst guarding what needs to be? And she said also she's second on that idea of Brother Biniam documenting the history. I believe that's what she said. Yeah, I second Biniam on documented history.
Yes, Razia is a very intelligent and highly involved analyst from Kenya. She's a Kenyan, and she has also spent time in Eritrea, has had a chance to really go down to the core of many issues, and has a very, very has an excellent understanding of the dynamics and history of Eritrea and of Ethiopia and of Kenya. Maybe she is somebody you may want to link up with and bring here for a third person conversation. She's excellent, open-minded academic.
Yeah, that would be very good, like a regional panelist is still around on Eritrea as this second Independence Day is fresh, because there is a lot to be learned. And myself, I'm very open on this platform to bring and to, to learn what we have to learn as Africans. There's a lesson in every nation, that I believe. This one is easy. Who determines the U.S. what is democracy? Because the U.S. was spreading in quotation democracy and freedom around the world. So he's asking. I read you also, Eddie Takle. I read your concern, but for us, for today, our topic is here. The resilience of the Eritrean people, meaning their pride, their resilience for the past 3 decades. And because I see a potential for us as an African that we can capitalize, because that is Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism it's a lived experience. It's a lived experience by our ancestors, by our forefathers, and by our heads of states currently. And the people like in Eritrea to pass in resilience in this, because of this sanction for the past more than 2 decades. The people in Zimbabwe, it is the same thing. I think for me, that's Pan-Africanism, to stand on their feet and say what they have to say to the West on its face, while other African countries fail to do so. Moving on, another question that I have is, looking ahead in the future, do you anticipate Eritrea taking a more active and engaged role regionally and globally? What factors might drive, do you think, this potential shift, if there is? And what impact could it have on Eritrea's relationship and influence regionally, globally? Ato Girmays, let's go with you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. As I mentioned earlier, the trajectory for Eritrea is to have a more important and more determinant role as a player in this region in particular. That is so because there are certain factors that don't change. One of the most important factors is the location, the strategic location of Eritrea on the Red Sea. A sea route, a marine trade route that is one of the major, if not the major, in the world. So therefore, you cannot sit on the front door and then not play any role. Even tiny Djibouti really has a very strategic role in this area. So it's not a matter of size, or it's not a matter of anything else. It's a matter of where you're located. So in that sense, there is that fundamental thing. And second thing is the leadership in terms of history, connect, and also legitimacy as a historical agent. This is a leadership that has come from the independence struggle and has outlived all the other structures around. And so therefore there is that long-term history that now makes the Eritrean government the most senior government in this region, basically, because of that time frame. And third is also its position in terms of, one, the necessity for an integrated Horn of Africa group bloc, and at the same time also linking that to being able to play a role on this side of the Red Sea that will now enhance trade and access for the rest of Africa as part of this collective open trade deals that we have. and also creating that sanity and security for international trade to happen by touching on the ports of the site. So the role that Eritrea can play is quite vivid and very clear, and the role that it has played so far. When you look at the Horn of Africa sub-region, you see in the last, since 2018, all the hopes and pillars for peace appeared. And second, when there was a collective threat, there was that response for through security, which also has its dividend. And at the same time, Eritrea being the most stable country, interestingly, out of this entire region, internal stability and peace and security has also now become the bastion of peace and security of the region, with the Somali army being trained and also the Ethiopian army being supported at the time when it was shaken by internal insurgents, and also now probably looking forward, a more precise role will be carved out for these countries in the region to look into the Sudan situation, and also similar linkages with South Sudan as well. So it is an emerging player up to this point, and by strategy of Washington, this is a powerhouse that was supposed to be silenced, and that is also attracting a lot of plot to silence in the future. But you have seen the recent visit to China, that speaks volumes on its own. Eritrea is no power in the region to shut down or to shut up, and that its role, frontline role, is an important addition to the global security architecture, and also the blue economy architecture as well. So it is, I hate to say an emerging, but an emerging voice in the region that would be playing very critical roles in the future.
Thank you, Ato Girmays. Brother Biniam, would you like to add on this one?
Yeah, I think it had been already mentioned. It's also crucial to bring that into this conversation as well. Eritrea had been trying to play its role in the region by bringing together the regional states early in the 90s. And not only in the region, but also expanding it into Uganda, Rwanda, Congo, bringing those states, into becoming progressive leaders that would defend interests of their country as well as the region. That Eritrea had been trying to play a constructive role in that, and that was something that wasn't liked by the U.S. and as the emerging power, the dominant power of the world that's claimed to be the only dominant power of the time. So all subsequent efforts were dedicated to isolate Eritrea, so that Eritrea wouldn't be playing any kind of constructive role in this region and have a voice. Eritrea had paid dearly for that. Its voice in defense of Somalia. It has cost this country so much. I don't know if you remember, the Islamic court were almost about to stabilize Somalia in a very meaningful fashion, but then that was squashed by obviously we could debate this, but the US was the one that was rallying against this, and Eritrea fiercely defended Somali's independence, sovereignty, and its desire to reconstitute itself at the time. And Eritrea supported the Islamic court. And of course, it's later on that evolved into a claim that Eritrea supported al-Shabaab, which was proved to be a non-existing support. So it is important to recognize that Eritrea had been through this in an attempt to contribute constructively to the regional integration, to contribute to the shaping the region so that we come out of these challenges that we face collectively. I mean, remember, this is a collective challenge. It's not an individual challenge we face. We need a stable neighborhood. We need neighborhood that's coherent in its policies, and B, also contribute to one another so that we meet those challenges. That has been US's #1 policy, so that Eritrea wouldn't come close to even doing that. But now time has turned, and Eritrea is, trying to emerge out of this after paying heavy price for the last few decades, and will now want to contribute as well. And of course, its location, its strengths, its lesson, the lessons that it has accumulated, experience. Remember, this crop of leaders have 60 years of experience. Yeah, military, political, geopolitical, diplomatic experience, 60 years. And it's important to recognize that. Which particular country in Africa could actually claim that they have this much of experience, 6 decades of experience? So there are values that Eritrea could add to the region, to the continent, and of course globally as well. And then as part of this, it's trying to contribute modestly to the UN engagements and different platforms. And one is in this particular grouping that in defense of the United Nations Charter. Eritrea wants, is there to contribute. Even in the United Nations Human Rights Council, Eritrea chose to engage them from within, as opposed to just being from outside and always being at the receiving end. Decided to join the council and then be able to engage them at that level. So Eritrea has all these elements, and it can contribute and add value to those regional and international issues. Thank you, Mahlet. Back to you.
If I may add on this one, Mahlet, just a little bit.
Please.
Yeah. There has been a deliberate effort, especially by Washington, to silence Eritrea, especially this government. And there is even a new document that has just come out soon after this trip to China by the president to discuss about what now Eritrea is and how Eritrea should be treated and so on. So it tells you that there is a coordinated war being designed again on Eritrea. And according to the president's speech, he said, we know this is happening and we are also now ready to face it again. So there is that level of commitment to say, okay, we also know what to do now about this as well. I am sure when Eritrea is discussed on a public forum like this, there are a lot of views that are sponsored views, and in other cases also personally driven views, and also critical views as well, genuinely critical views. And many feel unaccommodated. Each side from their own camp feel unaccommodated. It is true that we need to work more towards a bigger national dialogue, because the Eritrean opposition is not like what you see in many other places. It's not an opposition that is homegrown or anything. It's a sponsored opposition. However, there are also, like I said, a lot of highly educated young Eritreans who have come up with their own very interesting questions and so on. But the capping is, oh, Eritrea, the dictatorship, Eritrea has no constitution, Eritrea, all that is just, hyped propaganda work. And whenever, you're not ready to accommodate these things because they don't really speak to the realities on the ground. The reality on the ground for the average Eritrean, like I said earlier, is to get up in the morning and be able to achieve something, so that we are addressing and challenging all these successive writings happening on Eritrea. So, if somebody comes to tell you in a very demonizing manner that you have a dictatorship, then you start to think, what is that dictatorship now exactly? Is it some security issues that have been dealt the way they have been dealt? Is it some political issues that have been dealt the way they have been? Or what is that dictatorship? Or is this academic propaganda-based description of a dictatorship? They say Eritrea is the North Korea of Africa. Who ever saw North Korea? Well, what do people know about North Korea? And why is North Korea today developing nuclear power? No wonder it's being hated. There's something right that is happening somewhere for these people to descend on them. And in the same way, something right must be happening in Eritrea for them to be so worried and so focused and putting Eritrea on the highest level of any kind of media coverage with all kinds of narratives. The day will come when Eritreans will sit to challenge each other on these issues. There's no doubt about that. But as it is now, in terms of determining the role of Eritrea in the region, it cannot be described by descriptions provided by Washington and European Union and these so-called enemies of Eritrea, but of its own achievement and where it stands on issues and where it stands amongst its neighbors. This is what will determine, and this is why I feel that the role of Eritrea going forward is going to be bigger, more important, and it's not going to be pushed back. The China visit, like I said earlier, shows the recognition of Eritrea for what it stood for, not because of China's policy not to twist Eritrea and come and build a base in Eritrea. That will never happen. Eritrea, even with China, goes into a very respectful partnership. Because this visit has been made and this recognition has been given, nobody's going to come and trample Eritrea from China. That's not going to happen. And the Chinese know that very well. And so it has to be reciprocal, it has to be respectful, it has to be partnership, it has to be everything that they claim the relationships between the two countries are based on. These are the principles. And the principle is that China has recognized that Eritrea is on the path now to playing major role in this region. So therefore becomes the most important partner in the region. This is the status that the others have lost. So now they have to send their agents, they have to send the bots, they have to send their even hired Eritreans to come and say, no, we need to talk, we need to address the dictatorship first. It's a very interesting thing, but that will be the views will be there. Some of them will be addressed over time. Some of them are just dying views, but the country has decided to just march on.
Thank you for adding that, Ato Girmays. But with the next question really relates to that, in terms of what the future holds for Eritrea, as we consider the future, or Eritrea or otherwise. What are the key opportunities and challenges that lies ahead? And also envisioning that, meaning Eritrea's path unfolding and considering its achievements as evolving regional and global dynamic? How do you envision that? And of course, the challenges and opportunities that lies ahead for future Eritrea. Maybe let's start with Brother Biniam.
Thanks, Mahlet. Yeah, there are several opportunities that are going to be built already on the back of what has been achieved so far. As Giramay has mentioned, now there is growing educated classes being formed in Eritrea, literate society, and of course a growing middle class aspiration as well. So here you would have to understand this growing middle class aspirations. You cannot differentiate between a rural Eritrean and an urban Eritrean, particularly the youth that come from rural area and urban area. You cannot separate in their aspiration, in the ways in which they dress, in the ways in which they talk. It's very difficult to differentiate them, and this is for much of the population, and part of that is precisely because of the national service, I would argue. It brings them all together and brings them together in a way that they learn from each other, experience, and share similar values as well as also aspirations. So and Eritrea had been working and investing so much on the rural areas. Now the urban is going to demand so much, and I think meeting that is going to be quite a bit of a challenge. It's something that can be achieved because it's a very small population, but it is certainly a challenge. And obviously, its future is going to be determined by how it's going to be able to manage this particular aspiration that has been created as a consequence of the policies and programs that the government has invested for the last few decades. But it is a promising future. Many would probably talk about the natural resources it has, but I think the fact that this country has invested so much on the skills is going to contribute significantly to this potential we're talking about going forward. And in a way, this is going to bring Eritrea into this development path that would allow it to meet this 2030 agenda the African Union has set, and bringing as many people into middle class as possible, eradicating poverty. And I think that is going to be achieved in a very short period of time. That's what I see from already some of the stats that I see. And of course, it would also continue to contribute regionally. And I would like Eritrea to continue to have a stronger role in many of the organs that we have in this continent and elsewhere internationally. It needs to bring this lesson and it needs to bring this experience and share it. And going forward, that I would like to see being a part of the Eritrea's future. And I'm sure Giramay would agree with me that it is time for Eritrea to shine. At 32, there's so much that has been achieved, but then there's also so much to achieve. And the backlogs are there in a number of areas, and having to meet them would require dedication and careful consideration. Bring in the youth that has gone outside, and how do you attract them to come back? And those all investors that left Eritrea and have started to thrive in other places, will they be able to come back? What are the modalities of bringing them back? What kind of experience are they going to bring in? Because the kind of capitalist class that have been established in the rest of Africa are very much reckless, and very much greedy. And I'm sure many Eritreans would absorb those kinds of experience when they come to Eritrea. Will they be able to fit in properly with the existing policies and models? That it will require careful consideration and management. But there is so much potential there if it gels well nicely, and could transform the country in a short period of time. Thank you. I'll leave it here.
No, I think that's very well said. The opportunities, the number one opportunity is the high level human capital that Eritrea has. This is unmatchable. And the second is its strategic location on the Red Sea that will attract higher level of marine related investments and production investments. So that is another opportunity. Third is a huge market in both Sudan and Ethiopia to the west and to the south, in which Eritrea may not have to buy a lot of goods, especially agricultural produce from elsewhere because of cultural similarities and also culinary preferences. These two markets will augment the self-sufficient in food security policy of the country, which has already been achieved. And Eritrea doesn't import food. Basically, 85% of its food need is produced locally. So there is that opportunity of access to big markets in the area. And also being on that very vital global marine trade line, it can also now open access to deeper parts of Central and Northern Africa, where minerals and other goods will be able to move freely. So there is a very big potential for that. So these are among the very many, and of course the role it can play in terms of opportunities. In terms of challenges, this is a highly militarized region. Still, all influential markets around the world want to have a foothold here. So therefore, if you're not agreeing to the terms in the way they want, there could still be, problems in terms of international relations as pertains this area. And also the unrest and uneasy social situation, especially in Ethiopia and Sudan, will also be another challenge for Eritrea. And also, which is more strategic, is the dysfunctionality of IGAD and African Union that really don't come to standard when required. I say this because since 2018, for example, forget since independence, there hasn't been any senior level serious African Union mission to Eritrea. You have the United Nations special envoy on Horn of Africa. She has never been to Eritrea. But these are people who occupy big spaces in the political space and are probably even writing all kinds of policies and recommendations for this area and advising, the U.S. government, the Secretary General of the UN, and so on, without really, engaging with Eritrea. And the peace deal that was signed also in Pretoria did suffer and will continue to suffer from the absence of Eritrean consultation on that. So a lot of these things do have that lingering effect. And the other big issue is the relationship between Ethiopia and Egypt, both of which are good friends to Eritrea, very strategic friends to Eritrea, and need to be looked into very carefully, because in terms of national policy, Eritrea has a policy that every country has a right to use its natural resources for its benefit. But Ethiopia has gone one step further to say, we would like to use to generate power the Nile waters, but we will not prevent it from going through. we will also respect the needs downstream. This is, the best of the two you can get. One is they are able to generate power, a power that will also be shared even with Sudan and Eritrea and all the neighboring countries. But also at the same time, it becomes a point of attraction for external powers to use it as a point of conflict among this area, among nations in this area. So therefore, deterring potential collaboration and progress using this natural resource equitably. So there is also that challenge that is there. So altogether, I think we have a very interesting bag of opportunities and challenges for Eritrea on this.
Good. Thank you. Moving to our final questions for today is that this has been, I think, asked by some of Pan-African friends or others that I know on different social media platforms. I think I do know the answer, but I really want you, to look at it, and it comes from you. How can we reconcile Eritrea's assertion of not wanting to be a client or a vassal state for foreign powers with its increasing collaboration with China? Does this growing relationship with China align with Eritrea's desired independence and sovereignty, or does it raise concerns about the potential for becoming a vassal state?
Yeah, yeah, Girmay, I think you would be able to do the suggestion.
Yeah, let's start with that.
So let's first accept that the mind of frame of that assertion that Eritrea has is an assertion of opposing, an assertion of self-isolation, an assertion of not wanting to be a partner. So that has been the narrative, and like I said earlier, that narrative was wrong and still is wrong. Eritrea has a foreign policy which starts by saying we work and live in harmony and coexistence with all those who accept our sovereignty, accept our independence, and accept our self-reliance. That's what it says. So if you are a player, big or small, in the world, but have come to Eritrea with that approach, then it's not about reconciling, but it's about recognition, and that is what it is. With China, yes, because it is easy for many political analysts to see the power balance at the global level and then see what these ones do to gain one influence over the other and so on. Yes, there is that power game happening at the global level. There's no question about that. And if President Isaias is to go to Washington today, I tell you, they will receive him in even 10 times bigger way than they did in China. So what we see here is that Eritrea has asserted its self-importance in this region, and they are recognizing it. So whoever wins to get that favor is going to jump. So in this case, China has jumped. One. Second thing is Eritrea did not join the Belt and Road Initiative of China together with all other Africa countries when they all jumped on it. Eritrea said, no, this doesn't work for me. We want an equal partnership, and we want to be able, to be the ones to decide what we want to prioritize, what we want to do with which money, how much money we're going to get, what concessions we're going to make, for how long these concessions are going to be made. These are all decisions that we have to do ourselves. And so therefore, as long as we are not told to go into the script that everybody has signed, where there is no voice from everybody else, but there is only China's plan that people are signing to, we're not signing this. the Chinese understood. They understood, they respected that position. It took them a while to readjust themselves and also speak to their own systems of collaboration in order now to accept this new approach, this new and independent approach by Eritrea. A lot of work has gone into this trip, by the way, into this relationship. And so finally, they carved out an agreement, a unique agreement that is not part of the all China-Africa agreement, but this is now Eritrea-China agreement on the Belt and Road, where Eritrean priorities and Eritrean programs have been incorporated, and where China's strategic interests have also been recognized. And that is what has brought the two together to this level of communication. In it, there is nothing such as, having military bases here. It's not like that. If there is going to be a military base, then it's going to be an act that will only happen when the two agree that there is need for that and there is importance for that. Much in the same way of the United Arab Emirates base that was in Assad during the war with Yemen. It was agreed, it was decided, and it was a joint thing. When time was up, then they packed up and left. So Eritrea will never find itself in any kind of an agreement that will be dominating and that will also not address its own national interest and priorities. So the Chinese have not just walked in, but they have walked together with Eritrea into an agreement. So I don't see this relationship with China as having been made over immediate and the traditional way of interest, but this is something that has been cultivated over many years. There has been a lot of discussion that has gone into it. Eritrea, like it, rejected the World Bank when they first came with their own strategy for poverty reduction and all that nonsense that they were doing. They said, no, we do our own plan. We draft our own plan. We do our own national development plan ourselves. So the same has also been accepted by China. And this is the document that was signed. And it was on the basis of this document that the details of every year event that will happen collaboratively have been agreed and signed in this final trip. So this is what has happened.
Thank you for clarifying that, Ato Girmays, Brother Biniam.
Yes, I think that's a good insight that Giramay has given us. I would like also to add one thing. It is very important to understand what that vassal state means when you're engaging with other powers. Yeah, what do they want? Yeah, they give you something in exchange for something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what they give you and what they take away, if they don't match, then there's a serious problem. So Eritrea insisted on partnership. Right from the get-go, it has always been about we would like to be treated like partners, not recipients. None of these conditionalities you put here. We don't want to be errand boys. We don't want to even use our backyard for your military base or for your, grand geopolitical agenda. Yeah, we recognize you have interest. We have interest, but we have to somehow find a way to create a common grounds for both of us to benefit from those proceeds, but on equal footing. That's very important. And being treated as a partner entails exactly that. Now it is a buzzword in the development discourse, partnership. Even though we know it's a recipient and a giver relationship, it's not quite a partnership, but they continue to mobilize it. But Eritrea insisted in its genuine sense, and that's very crucial. The US at some point wanted to build a hotel in Dalak Island, and then they said they want to police it, they want to protect it, and bring in their security. And Eritrea said, no, we don't want to do that. We are capable of doing it. When we need help, we will call you. Yeah. Even in the Red Sea basin, Eritrea insisted upon, let's do it ourselves. So we don't want to bring in other powers, sending their naval ships and, policing this region for us. Let's do it by ourselves and cooperate, and then in order to defend our interests. And of course, this is a recognizing that everybody has interest in that, because it's a shipping route, a very significant shipping route, strategic one, and recognizing that while everybody wants to contribute to it or dominate it, the first individual countries that should be responsible for that are the regional states. So Eritrea refuses to have this unequal relationship, and that's very important. With Russia, the same thing. With China, it has insisted upon working on common grounds. And other states, probably they would facilitate the looting of their resources. The leaders would probably engage in that, but Eritrea refused. And in mining, we would like to have a share. And other resource extraction, we would like to have a share, And that kind of arrangement is what Eritrea has demanded. And therefore, it is very difficult for me to imagine that Eritrea would engage with China in any other way than this particular arrangement. And what I envisage is this is going to be the modality for which China would also engage with other African states as well. I could be wrong, but they probably see this being very useful, both in terms of a narrative to establish China is not here to exploit Africa, but to contribute to its development. And Africans themselves are charting their path, defining their destiny. All we're doing is contributing to that. And I think that I would like to see in the rest of the continent, but I would see China wanting to apply that to other African states. Perhaps I could be wrong, but I suspect that might be a model. And it has been a model in other elements, partnership, the idea of partnership, insisting on partnership. I don't think any other African state did it in the 90s. Eritrea insisted upon it. And it was maligned for that. They were called stubborn and fascist and what have you. But that term now latched on. Now they are mobilizing it in its hollow form, of course, just as a narrative, as a discourse in a state of a meaningful engagement. But I would see some element of this particular engagement Eritrea had with China being also exported in the rest of the continent as well. Thank you, Mahlet. It's been...
Thank you very much, Ato Girmays, Brother Biniam. Really, it has been 2 hours and a half. In this 2 hours and a half, we have discussed several topics that can lead to, production of or a publishing of different articles on different topics. You have shared here an immense knowledge that probably we may not find anywhere else. We have shared ideas, and those of you who have been here, in addition to supporting our channels through our PayPal accounts, the other way also you can support us is also by sharing this knowledge, this information with your network. So that way we can empower each other. Information, knowledge, those are power. So please do share this with your network. And really, thank you very much. I really feel blessed to have you. And thank you so much. Other than that, what can I say? Thank you, those of you also. I did not really plan that it will take more than an hour and a half, but I did not I was like greedy. Okay, let me just ask all the questions. You don't know when is the next time. And I feel that all this is really related also with the resilience of Eritrea, I find it really unique, and I'm inspired by words, ideas, and that's what really inspired this whole discussion. Yeah, and thank you. I will give you maybe a minute for both of you to say your final word, and then we will close our session. Ato Girmays, would you like to say something as a closing remark?
I just want to say thank you also for this opportunity. I think in my mind, and every time I have an interview and every time I have these kinds of opportunities, I always try to remind our hosts that yes, there are a lot of things to be learned. Maybe time is even running out on many people to get those points to learn. But it's also a very good opportunity to shape the future as well, or to go into the future. And I personally believe the best way to go into the future is when minds from all the countries in the region start to come together. We cannot have Ethiopians alone talking about Eritrea. We cannot have Eritreans alone talking about Ethiopia, and we cannot have Somali. You see, this we have to break because other than our commonality of history and also natural connections that we have had over centuries, I think it's also good to pay attention to the emerging young professionals in these countries. These are highly achieved young professionals. Um, these are the people who own the future and who need to be talking about the future. And these are the people who need to network in order to learn from past experiences, especially what were missed and opportunities that were missed and what we could have done better and what pillars we need to build forward, strengthen going forward. This can only come when they're meeting and when they're discussing. So I really hope that as you do what you do as a Pan-African, of course you have an agenda for the entire continent, I understand. But I think the least spoken and the least cohesive and the least understood amongst ourselves region and Africa is actually our region and the Horn of Africa, not the others. And I think we need to give it a chance now that we are having platforms like this that belong to us, platforms like this that are run by our people in the region. I think we need to step up this opportunity much more. That's what will give us strength going forward. That's what I want to say. And again, thank you very much. And again, it was honor to also be here with Biniam. I know Biniam does a lot of research. He's a very good thinker, very calm, very decent person.
Yeah.
And when I see people like Biniam, I see the future of my country. So I feel very satisfied with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Girmays. I really
Thank
appreciate that.
Thank you, Ato Girmays. Really, yeah, this is not only where knowledge is shared, also this is also where ideas originate. We have seen that documenting history of Eritrea, it sparked that light. Now somebody else said it also in the comment section. So we never know. Somebody might pick it somewhere by watching this video, and somebody will start to do something. Also, what you said now, Ato Girmays, to really engage and bring people from the Horn of Africa. I think I started to do it, maybe it's a year ago or something, like every other week to bring people from Horn of Africa. And at some point, I think we also have Brother Biniam, right? We have people from Somalia, Kenya, and from Ethiopia. But yeah, now that really reminds me for me to engage more and revive that and do it on a regular basis. Yeah, people need to talk. People need to engage. It's more powerful than the political, the politicians. There's a lot to talk. how to trade, what can we do together, how can we harness each other. There is a lot more, and then that way we can make it easier also for our governments to facilitate things once we have that platform, that once we share such information. Having said that, I will give the final word to Brother Biniam. What is anything that you'd like to say and close this?
Thank you very much, Mahlet. I see your dedication. I see your commitment to this, and I really appreciate it. And I always want to support this program in every way I can. And I'm very much honored to have shared this particular platform with Giramay. Thank you for very kind words that you put forward. And encouraging me to do better, to become something. Yeah. I wanted to say this about what Eritrea had gone through as a final word. It is, in as much as it appears to be unique, it is an African struggle in many respects. It is a struggle within the continent, along with other states in the continent. They are facing similar challenges we face, but we face it slightly differently. Yeah, and we try to meet them slightly differently. So there are lessons we share, and that would have to be the ways in which we could bring in what's learned in Eritrea, what is learned elsewhere, the weaknesses, the strengths, the shortcoming, the jubilations, the successes, the victories. If you bring all that, then that's where you get the colorful Africa, which can transcend, all those challenges we have, all those boundaries that have forced us to see within and confine ourselves, into those boundaries that are already established, and both in our physical world and the mental state. We can transcend that, and we can see the commonalities of our challenges. Once you see the commonalities of our challenges, and then we can bring our resources, and our skills, our minds together to come out of this. And unless we do it collectively, that would always going to be a half-baked achievement. A half achievement cannot be a success. Yeah, for us to be successful, we need to bring together all those resources that we have. And I mean, if you look at the region, what are the tensions we have between Eritrea and Ethiopia? Where does it come from? But between Somalia and Ethiopia? What is it? I mean, why is that impossible to have, those communities that have already roots that connects them, that binds them, and their destinies are already determined. Well, we are going to live together, and the only way we get out of those miseries, those challenges, perpetual problems that we have, by coming together. And if we work hard and bring our people to some common understanding about this, we will have a much faster achievement of what we aspire to achieve. Yeah, of course, it is eradicating poverty, developing our states, establishing sustainable, strong states. Yeah, that are integrated. That's all we want to achieve, and live peacefully. Yeah. And everybody, is demanding for that. You look at people of Tigray, that's what they are facing, that this is what they want. But then, who is creating this tension and, stalking it and fanning it, to achieve what? So I really appreciate that what you're trying to do, and this is where we need to see Eritrea's role should be. And every Eritreans, I try to tell them this is how we need to work. And of course, you have a lot of Ethiopians that live with us as well. This is the kind of common understanding we try to establish. And of course, the negative the elements and the detractors are going to be there, but the only way to come out of it is by constantly engaging and challenging our thoughts and skewed narratives that we have already accepted as normal. And as soon as we start to do that, come to common path, a common understanding of our future, then we will be in a much better and a stronger position, both regionally and within the continent as well. And if we work harder, we definitely would achieve what needs to be achieved. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mahlet, once again. Thank you, everyone. Those viewers who have been waiting here for 2.5 hours. That's quite something. Thank you very much.
Quite a long time, but yeah, it's like a class. I always say it's an education. It's like you're sitting in class and learning. But yeah, thank you, the audience, for bearing with us. And I'm really, it was an honor for me to have Ato Girmays here. I'm sure it's the first time, but definitely not the last time. I will be happy to have you again, and also, engage you in panels that we do. Having said that, I shout also. I want to give a shout out to EZD, Miss Razia, Kia, Bakura, Eddie. Those of you who think that your questions might not be answered, I think they are answered. Ato Girmays have answered them before. CNS, I know this is Brother Ola. Thank you all of you for bearing with us. And please, the great thing that you can do for us is when we can reach out more people, please share this information, share this knowledge with other people. I again wish to the people of Eritrea a happy 32nd Independence Day, all the best to the present and the future Eritrea, because of that, we also can benefit as a neighboring country when one is peaceful and prosperous. It's really important also for the region. So really a heartfelt, a happy Independence Day, and all the best to all of you, and have a great weekend, have a great evening, have a great weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mahlet.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.